Commissioner Member Barbara Estrada here. Committee Member Yuki Ikesi. Present. Committee Member Stephen Ricosa.
Thank you. So we're all here. And before we begin, let me read the hearing procedure. Public hearings are conducted by the chair in accordance with the following procedures. The chair of the committee directs all activities during the hearings. All comments shall be addressed to the committee. Members of the public shall be given up to 3 minutes. However, this may be reduced subject to the number of speakers and at the chair's discretion. No additional comments shall be heard upon the close of public hearing, although the committee reserves the right to direct questions to any speaker on any matter. Okay, let's go to the first item of the agenda, which is a public presentation. Would the member of the public like to speak on any matter?
That's not on the agenda.
It's not on the agenda. Okay, I don't see anyone volunteering, so let's go to the review of legal parameters, which will be given by the staff of Fazla. Leslie?
Okay. Good evening, Chair Ikesi and committee members and members of the public. My name is Diana Fazeli, Deputy City Attorney, and I'm here to provide a presentation about the legal parameters involved with districting, and then also with the requirements for our proposed charter amendment and other statutory requirements that we're required to adhere to in this process when we're drawing the line. Dr. Gobele, our demographer, will also be going over some of these processes, and she's going to be doing the fun task of applying the numbers to the law. So my presentation isn't going to be as interesting as hers. Okay. So last year we had a charter review committee in which, after much deliberation, they recommended to council that the city move to a 2-district system. So the proposal is that the city is divided into 2 districts, and each district shall be represented by 3 council members. And the order of the elections in 2018 through 2024 is a transition period in which it's going to result in, during each election cycle, one of the districts will have 3 of its council members up for election. And that is to effectuate also the voting method that was recommended by the Charter Review Committee, which is the single transferable vote, which is a type of ranked choice voting. And I see a member of our Charter Review Committee member here who might be able to explain single transferable vote better than me, but the way it works is that each voter will will be able to rank 3 candidates of their choice by their preferences, and then once one of the candidates reaches a threshold, then the votes go to the second candidate that gets the most votes, and so on. So essentially, it's meant to reduce the amount of wasted votes that occur during elections. On this slide up here is the ballot question that our office drafted. It's going to be the ballot question that's presented to the voters that they vote on, and it's meant to encompass the 2 districts and the voting method that has been recommended by the Charter Review Committee and approved by the council. So charter cities under Election Code Section 21620 are required to follow the statutory criteria set forth in this slide. All districts shall contain a nearly equal population. The districts must comply with the Federal Voting Rights Act and the Equal Protection Clause of the U.S. Constitution. And when establishing the boundaries, the council may give consideration to the 4 factors on the slide. The Federal Voting Rights Act considerations refers to the prohibition on diluting the voting power of racial, ethnic, and language minorities, and the Equal Protection Clause mandates the one person, one vote principle. So the maps that our demographer is going to bring forward to the committee after the second public hearing is going to have these criteria applied. So the demographer is very good at her job, and any map that she proposes will be in adherence to the statutory criteria. Under the elections code, when we are creating our districts, we're required to have 4 public hearings, 2 of them before a draft map is drawn and 2 of them after a draft map is drawn. And this is our first of before the map has been drawn. And then at the last public hearing, it is intended that the committee will come forward to council with a recommendation on one of the maps that should be enacted by an ordinance. So we are expecting on May 8th to come forward to council with an ordinance. The language in the ordinance is going to carve out that it will only be effective if the ballot measure is passed in June. But we have to have the ordinance in place as soon as possible in order for the registrar of voters to effectuate the districts that we are trying to create. This is the timeline we have with our public hearings and outreach, and then the ordinance that I just talked about on May 8th. It will go for a first reading on May 8th, and then on May 22nd, it will be adopted. And then it will go into effect on June 21st. That's it.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm Jean Gobelet, the demographer, and I have a short presentation we'll be seeing quite soon. I've been working with the city of Santa Clara in Santa Clara Valley for many, many, many years, and I'm fairly familiar with the geography, although it keeps changing all the time. I have to confess that I haven't been to this part of Santa Clara since it was built, and it's really interesting to see what is new up here. It's very different from what I remember. Right. So I'm going to talk about districting criteria used by demographers, and this is sort of the applied version of what Diana was talking about. I understand what the legal requirements are and have worked with them for quite a while, but of course I'm not an attorney, but I am familiar with how we demographers implement for political districting. After every decennial census, any set of election district boundaries must be evaluated to see if this population equality criterion is met. So after Census 2020 data are released in early 2021, the city will need to look to see if the population equality requirement is still met, and if not, to move the council boundaries, probably not very much, but some, to adjust so that they are equal in population, or essentially equal in population. I'll also talk shortly about the Federal Voting Rights Act and the state elections code requirements and a few other criteria. So the population equality requirement, as I said, Census 2010 data we must use, and must be nearly equal in total population. The population equality requirement has been interpreted by the courts for jurisdictions like this city to mean that there should be no more than a 10% deviation from the ideal population size of an election district. Now, the total deviation is a function of the number of election districts that are created. And in this case, the city is looking at just 2 of them. In Census 2010, the city's population was 116,468, and each of 2 city council districts would contain approximately half of this total, about 58,234 residents. And since there are just the 2 districts, well, even if there were a whole lot more, the difference between the most and least populous districts should not exceed 5,823, which is 10% of that ideal district size of 58,234. And this measure is called the total deviation. So you might be tempted to think of this as plus or minus 5% of the ideal district size, but that's not the way to interpret it, because the 10% deviation spread can be lopsided from a minus 4% to a plus 6%, for example. So it isn't the sum of, it isn't the range of plus or minus 5%. Anyway, this total deviation is of about 10% or less, has been accepted by courts. Now, congressional districting or redistricting has to have much tighter tolerance, but we're not doing that here. We have some leeway, and that's a good thing, because we can use this leeway to draw more logical boundaries. We don't have to draw boundaries that zigzag and look strange just to get the ideal population. We can make boundaries that are more logical and understandable to all of the people. Federal Voting Rights Act, as it's been interpreted by the courts, says that election districts should provide members of protected groups the opportunity to elect representatives of their choice, or possibly to influence the election of representatives of their choice. Now, protected groups means groups that historically were not afforded an equal right to vote. Historically, the focus was on African Americans, and that was the group that the Federal Voting Rights Act originally focused on, but it also was written and does today include members of various other groups, including Hispanics and non-Hispanic Asians, non-Hispanic Native Americans, and non-Hispanic Pacific Islanders, and members of various other groups. In other words, everyone except non-Hispanic whites. So protected groups include everyone except non-Hispanic whites. Certain language groups are protected under the Federal Voting Rights Act, but we don't really pay attention to that when districting. The Supreme Court has ruled in a couple of cases, first of all, that race cannot be the predominant factor in redistricting, race being one thing to call a protected group, a racial group, but they're not all racial. Some of them are ethnic, like Hispanic. So race cannot be the compelling or predominant factor in redistricting unless there's a compelling state interest, and I have yet to see a compelling state interest. I'm sure that redistricting lawyers could tell us what some of those might be, but I'm not familiar with any, and I very much doubt there would be anything here that would fit under that category. The more recent Supreme Court decision from 2016 affirmed that total population is to be used to balance election districts. Evenwell was about whether people who are registered to vote or people who are eligible to vote might be the basis for population balance, but the Supreme Court ruled against that. So it is total Census 2010 population that we're trying to equalize in drawing the council boundaries, the council districts. A traditional redistricting or districting criteria are mentioned in the state elections code, and they mention factors like topography, geography, cohesiveness, contiguity, integrity, and compactness of territory, and communities of interest. Now, we don't have big topographical and geographical features to take into account. There's no mountain range in the middle of the city of Santa Clara, no big river. That would be a logical dividing point, especially if there were only one bridge across it or something like that. But when we get to the next category, cohesiveness, contiguity, integrity, and compactness of territory, these sound like really nice criteria, but when it comes to defining them, we run into difficulties because someone's idea of cohesiveness or integrity or compactness might not be the same as someone else's. There are lots of different measures of compactness, for example, lots of statistical measures that vary in the results. Communities of interest can include geographic communities like neighborhoods and socioeconomic groups, and here's where the Federal Voting Rights Act protected groups are. It could be something like a business district, or it could be some other unifying factor that makes people think, this is my area, this is my group of people, I belong to this group of people. And we're hoping during this series of public hearings to elicit what members of the public think are communities of interest that matter in the city of Santa Clara. The courts also, in various decisions, have said that it's fine to respect boundaries of existing political subdivisions when possible, like voting precincts. And I do have the latest set of Santa Clara County voting precincts for the city and can take those boundaries into account. And why this would matter is it's easier for the registrar of voters to implement a districting plan if it respects existing precinct boundaries, but by no means is this always possible. In fact, it's usually impossible to just use precinct boundaries. So the registrar of voters, to implement whatever plan that's adopted, will need most likely to do a little bit of revising of the existing precincts. But we do like to look at what the boundaries are currently, all else being equal. We can respect census geography like city blocks. In fact, we must use what is called a census block when drawing districts, election districts. We must put blocks together, census blocks together, to aggregate them to form the election districts because the population counts are attached to those census blocks. So we do need to pay attention to that level of census geography for districting purposes. It's perfectly legal to avoid head-to-head contests between incumbents, all else being equal. That's perfectly acceptable, especially since these incumbents were elected in the first place. And the courts have ruled that it's fine for that to be taken into account along with the other factors, but it's not supposed to be a predominant factor. And there can be other criteria that may be local to the jurisdiction, and I'm hoping to hear some of those in comments from the public during our public hearings. We try to use major roads and identifiable features as boundaries. Freeways, railroad tracks, if they're creeks that everyone knows about, rivers, anything that's a recognizable, identifiable feature. We probably would not want to split, for example, the Levi Stadium area between two council districts, because in people's minds that belongs together. We would try to keep things together that logically are seen as belonging together. Okay, now we get to measures for the city as a whole, and this is a sample of some of the variables that I'll report on when it comes time to present districting plans. So this is for the whole city. The left-hand column presents the federal race ethnic category, and the ones we're going to use are Hispanic or Latino, and then of several not Hispanic or Latino categories. That's non-Hispanic Asian, non-Hispanic white, non-Hispanic black or African American, and non-Hispanic all others. Now, there are groups with significant numbers of other groups, but I've collapsed them, at least just for this table. And there's another reason I collapsed them that I'll mention in a minute. In 2010, the population of all ages for the city was, as I said before, 116,468. And the most populous category was non-Hispanic Asian. Now, of course, there is a lot of variety in this category, and another source of data from Census 2010 gives us a breakdown of Asian categories, non-Hispanic Asian categories, and I can report those if it turns out to be useful or to be seen as desirable. There are also some ancestry categories that might be considered Asian, like the city of Fremont has a substantial Afghan population, and although the Census Bureau groups Afghans with Asians, the Afghans in Fremont wanted to be taken into account separately, and we did that. But in any event, these groups are not, in all cases, homogeneous. The next column, VAP, which is the acronym for Voting Age Population, that's people aged 18 and over, was a lot smaller than the population of all ages. And you can see a slightly different distribution of the VAP. The largest group, most populous group, aged 18 plus, is non-Hispanic whites. You can see the whites and Asians switch places there. And then the last column is not a count. The total population and the voting age population are counts from Census 2010. The estimate of the number of people who are eligible to vote, which is called Citizen Voting Age Population, or CVAP, is an estimate derived from a survey called the American Community Survey that the U.S. Census Bureau conducts on an ongoing basis. And the estimates that we've made from the latest American Community Survey are shown here. So we have for the Hispanic or Latino category, 10,640 persons citywide that are citizens of voting age population, citizens of voting age. And we have non-Hispanic Asians, and the very largest group here, again, by a considerable margin, is non-Hispanic whites. And that, of course, is because quite a few people who live in this city are not citizens. Even though there may be 18 plus, they're not citizens. They're H-1B workers and other people who, for one reason or another, are not citizens. And the reason that this is used as a measure at all is to identify whether a particular set of election districts respects the rights of groups protected under the Federal Voting Rights Act to the extent that they could elect representatives of their choice from an election district, or if they could influence the election of someone of their choice, not necessarily of their own group, but of their choice. And this is the measure that courts use when evaluating whether a set of election district boundaries meets Federal Voting Rights Act requirements. I'm not sure how much this is going to be necessary. This variable is going to be needed when we evaluate districting plans for your city, but you'll see that measure. These estimates will be presented with any districting plans that I give you. The reason, going back to what I said about non-Hispanic, all others being grouped together, the reason that they're grouped together is that the error margins attached to the CVAP estimates are huge for small geographical areas and for small groups, small population groups. So it's practically worthless to talk about what the CVAP counts or estimates are for Native Americans, for example. The group just isn't populous enough for the error margin to allow us to reach any conclusion at all. So,
Dr. Goblet, do you have an accurate estimate of the CVAP for the Santa Clara?
Well, these, as I said, are just estimates. So what you see here in the right-hand column are the estimates for the city as a whole. Well, I haven't presented the error margins. I can show them to you if you want. They're kind of complicated tables, so I usually don't present them. But I can give you the error margins. But in order to avoid error margins being a problem, I grouped non-Hispanic, all others together. There are a lot of different categories that the census counts, but they're too small in number in this city for us to treat them separately. The citizen voting age population estimates for those groups are unreliable because of error margins.
I guess I understand what you're saying about the smaller groups, but if you look at the Asians, whites, and Hispanics, is the margin of error?
It's relatively tolerable. But then when we get down to census block level or even a significantly larger piece of geography, we get error margins creeping in as an issue again. So there's some ways we deal with that, which I won't go into now, but I can if you want. Right? So these are measures that I'll be reporting in connection with any districting plan. And in response to a suggestion that I received, we're going to put the the registered voter counts too, or estimates of registered voters for each election district. And because we're required to equalize total population, sometimes, in fact often, there aren't equal numbers of registered voters in each election district. That's inevitable. With just 2 city council districts, it may not be such a big difference, but if you have a lot of single-member election districts, this can be much more of an issue.
So, would you add some of the information that you provided at our pre-meeting last week, in particular about the question that Committee Member Ricosa raised? That I think what I remember hearing is that while the total size of the district has to adhere to the 10%
population
right,
equality,
based on the total population, when we look at the districting, we should be looking at not just the population itself, but the VAP and the CVAP, and even the registered voters?
Well, you can. It depends on what you're trying to evaluate. First of all, we used to use voting age population before we had citizen voting age population estimates. I'm not sure we even need to show you voting age population numbers anymore. I think the 2 columns on this table that are relevant are the total population of all ages, and the CVAP. We need total population to meet the so-called 1 person, 1 vote, or population equality requirement. We need CVAP in order to assess the extent to which members of protected groups are going to have the opportunity to elect or influence the election of representatives of their choice. So they serve different purposes. The population measure is for population equality evaluation, and the CVAP measure is to evaluate the possibility for members of protected groups to elect representatives of their choice. The number of registered voters probably isn't a very useful basis for you to evaluate election districts. It's a matter of interest, but it's not relevant to any kind of legal criterion. It's just more a matter of interest. And also the number of people who actually turn out might just be a matter of interest. But it's going to be inevitable, I think, probably, that the city council districts, however they're drawn, will not have equal numbers of registered voters and equal levels of voter turnout. This just isn't something we can predict in advance, first of all, and it isn't something that's required by law. So there are lots of different things that I could give you as data for a particular districting plan, but the 2 things that are really important for me to report are the population counts and the deviation of the plan, and the CVAP mix.
But I remember from, this is a much older demography report that your company provided in 2012, that, for example, the ratio of VAC to population varied greatly among
Yes.
those racial ethnic categories.
Yes.
It varied even more when you look at the CVAP or the actual registration,
Yes.
or the voter turnout. So in order to have a complete picture, I think it'll be worthwhile to have that information presented to us. on, when you propose a district, I would like to see see the breakdown, not just in terms of total population, but also the CVAP registration and also voter turnout, if possible.
Yes. If you wanted to compare all these for 2010,
Oh, I
one
guess
thing,
2010
or-
is what, the latest information
yeah,
you
but
have.
I could, for voter registration and turnout, have more recent data for you.
Thank you. All right, Committee Member Estrada.
Okay. Thank you. My question is, I just want to go back to the basics. If you were bound to use the 2010 census and you have to stay within the 10% criteria, even if you give current data and you find out that there's only so many by age group that are eligible to vote, and if they're registered by those numbers, if we have that data, yes, it's informational, but you're not going to be able to sway the numbers based on that 10%.
No, that has nothing to do with the 10%. The 10% deviation applies only to the total population of each election district.
Okay, that's what I want to clarify. Thank you.
Shall I proceed? Or
Yes,
question?
please go.
All right, and I have to use census blocks to build election districts. That's what the bottom lines here say. I mentioned that already. These are the only these are the smallest units of census geography we have, and we have population counts attached to them. Those are counts, not estimates, for the for the total population by race, ethnicity, the categories that I showed you here on the left. All right, now I'm going to talk about GIS a little bit. Computer mapping, wonderful thing. We have a layer of GIS, a layer on a map. Can you remember old-fashioned maps with transparency overlays that showed different kinds of things? You have a base map of the city, and you can put on top of it the neighborhoods or the school campuses or the business districts or zoning areas. Well, that's what GIS does for you inside of a computer, and it's much more powerful and much easier to use than those old overlays were. So one of the layers we have is for Census 2010 blocks. We have Santa Clara County precincts already. We have GIS layers that the city is in the process of providing for us, and they are getting ready a lot of useful layers to use so that when you look at a map that has a election district boundary on it, you can say, okay, where's City Hall, and where is this library? Which council district is it in, or where is X? So you'll be able to orient yourself pretty easily using the maps, I think. Then there are GIS layers from the Census Bureau, including railroads, water features, landmarks. Now, the city is providing some of these things, but I may be using a mixture of GIS data from the city and from the Census Bureau. Santa Clara Unified School District also has provided its attendance area boundaries. Thank you very much to the city staff for arranging that I get them. That's useful. Probably just the elementary attendance area boundaries. The Unified School District's middle and high school boundaries serve intact elementary attendance areas, as best I can tell from the map. So probably best just to be looking at the elementary attendance areas just to see if here's a boundary we could use. But that might not turn out to be useful. For example, I don't know how often the school district changes its attendance area boundaries. Sometimes they have to adjust them so that schools are properly enrolled, so that one school doesn't have to put more portables on the campus and another school doesn't have empty classrooms. So I'm not so sure the extent to which we should use attendance area boundaries. Just as a sample, for some of the things that are geographically distributed in the city in uneven fashion, here's a map of total population by census block. And you can see that the size of the circle shows total population. The largest circles are around 1,000 people back in 2010. And census blocks do not have equal populations. So the area where we are right now is close to a fairly heavily populated part of the city, right in this area. You have other population concentrations in the southeast and on the western side of the city. So the population's not distributed evenly across the landscape. So you probably can't expect to see the land area, the geographic area, square miles, of two council districts being equal. It's the population we equalize on, not the population count. So you know that some areas have fewer people living in them than others. Well, that's what I'm saying, to make it simple. This map shows the Census 2010 population by race ethnicity, and this one has a lot more categories than I showed you in the table before. Over here in the legend, you can see we have Native American, non-Hispanic, Hawaiian Pacific Islander, other race, and other mixed race. Those are the categories I collapsed because of the need to bring the error margins down for CVAP. But I can report them separately. I just can't not give you CVAP estimates for those. And then finally, here's a map of the precincts back a number of years ago in the city. I think I did this map in 2016, or maybe it was 2012, but I need to update it. But this shows the CVAP population by election precinct. These are estimates, though, because census blocks boundaries do not match precinct boundaries. Anyhow, we can show you lots of different maps of this sort that may be informative or may be, so what? In any case, probably by the next public hearing, we'll have some more exciting maps and more up-to-date maps than I can show you tonight.
So I'm assuming that after you compile all this information that you're going to be proposing a district boundary line that we...
Well, as I understand it, the process is for this public hearing and the next one that's on March 8th at the City Council chambers to be data gathering, and I'm hoping that you and members of the public will be suggesting criteria or things to consider when drawing the boundaries. After I hear what you and members of the public have to say about this, I will then draw boundaries to present at the third public hearing on March 26th, back here in the North Side Library. And I can then, after that, hearing more input, tweak boundaries or design new ones in time for the April 12th public hearing, the fourth public hearing at the Central Park Library. So this is a cumulative process.
Okay, so I'm wondering, this information is going to be posted online for the people and residents to review, right? But it's very hard for individuals to look at the maps and examine, do analysis. So would it be possible for us to provide raw data, perhaps at the precinct level or the block level, of the breakdowns that we're going to, the analysis that we are going to decide to conduct, so that firstly, I like to be able to look at some data myself, but I'm sure members of the public would like to see the information as well, because otherwise, if we just look at this map with the graphs, it's
no, this is useless. This is pretty useless.
Coming from
yes.
you to us, and we're just going to be saying, oh, this would make sense, or this doesn't make sense, but we're not going to be able to make an intelligent feedback. Is that something that we can do?
Yes, what I am planning to do, and I can augment this or change it as you wish, but what we usually do is divide the city into sub-areas, a lot of sub-areas with population counts, with counts of the total population by race, ethnicity, and CVAP estimates that people can then combine to see what would happen if you combine them into a city council district. Although the numbers, keeping track of the numbers is really tricky here.
I understand there are errors of margins, but
No, I'm not talking about error margins. It's just that it's a time-consuming process to do all the arithmetic, to add blocks together or pieces together.
of spreadsheets. So yeah, if we can have spreadsheets, that would be great.
Yes, definitely. And we have a really compressed timeline here. So we can't go through a whole lot of revising of boundaries. So I'm hoping that we can really quickly get an idea from people who come to the public hearings, as well as from other community members who send emails to the city that would suggest things that we can try to do in map drawing. And each time I come back, I'll say, it's been suggested that we try this. And I'll say, this is possible because, or I may say, this may not work because, and the reasons. So there's going to be back and forth, a lot of it, I hope, in order to make it possible for you to see boundaries that make sense. Now, people say, oh, it's going to be easy, just draw a line that divides the city in half, but in fact, it probably might not work quite that simply. Now, what I would like to request of you and members of the public is if you would care to say what kinds of criteria matter to you, that especially members of the public, using major roads, having identifiable boundaries, or keeping certain kinds of things intact, it would be very helpful. And I don't think it's, one of the questions I had was, would it make sense to most people to keep all the area here north of 101 in a single council district, or should this area north of Bay Shore be split? So that's the kind of question I think about and wonder what people would say. So if I can get suggestions or ideas about that, as well as other things, what other boundaries seem logical to people, it might be quite helpful. And here finally is the registered voter mix. I think you asked for this, Yuki, at our last meeting. So this is the 2010 registered voter mix. And you can see, if you switch back and forth between the maps, that the shares are different when you look at CVAP and registered voter.
Right, and I think one of the things we also discussed was to perhaps break down the Asian
yes, Asian
population
subgroups.
Right.
Right.
We see huge chunks of others.
Well, that's because we don't have lots of surname categories. There aren't distinct surname lists that have been tested to some extent that can identify people's surname. That's the only way we can identify or try to identify registered voters, because when we register to vote, we aren't asked our race. We're asked our age, but not our race or ethnicity.
Right, but you have their names.
And the California statewide database has a list that's been developed by the Census Bureau and other groups of surnames that typically belong to a particular group. It has Spanish surname list and Asian surname lists that include Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Vietnamese, and Asian Indian surnames. There's a lot of overlap sometimes, though, so these aren't definite.
I guess this is the kind of input that we hope to get from the public then.
Whether this sort of thing matters. Now,
right.
There was one other thing that I thought it was going to be important to say, but I forgot what it is, so I'll quiet now. That was my last slide.
Okay, so thank you very much, Dr. Gobele. I have one quick question to the city attorney. One of the things that we're hoping our effort will avoid is the lawsuit based on the California Voting Rights Act. And that act specifically tells you, I don't know, and how does it relate to, like, you know, the kind of groups of interest or other
So currently, the city has an
Operation
at-large election system, and the California Voting Rights Act says that an at-large election system that works in a way that members of a protected class has not been able to be elected in the legislative body of the city, that's in violation of the California Voting Rights Act.
So when we say protected class?
Yes.
What specifically
Protected
do you
group.
protected groups? What specifically do we?
Like Dr. Gobele mentioned before, it's race, it could be ethnicity, language groups, and I believe religious groups as well, but for purposes of demography, I believe that's hard to measure, or maybe not. Okay, it is hard, yes. So I think for purposes of demography, we stick to race and ethnicity.
So Dr. Gobele said that race is one of the things that we should take into account, but it shouldn't be the entire consideration.
Right.
But when it comes to this issue of California voting rights, that's pretty much the only relevant issue.
It seems like it.
Yeah, the California Voting Rights Act, is this working? It does not speak to that sort of issue. It just is designed to require communities, jurisdictions to switch to single-member election districts. It does not add to the criteria that the Federal Voting Rights Act or the U.S. Constitution recommends or requires. It does not say anything about population equality or protected group definitions. Those are left at the federal level. So the California Voting Rights Act is the law that is causing many jurisdictions to switch to election by district. And that's what its main target is, as I understand it.
Does it specifically say you have to have districts?
It says if they're, under some circumstances, you have to go to district election. That's not really exactly what it says, but I can provide you with the text. It's quite a short law, if you should care to read
The
it.
California Voting Rights
Yes.
Act? Yes.
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 It,
So it is a very short statute, and basically it says that to fix that problem of the at-large system only resulting in the election of people who are not members of a protected class, that the remedy may be switching to single-member districts.
I'd like to suggest just a slight change in what you said. It doesn't say the members of protected groups get elected to office, although
They may not have an
But
opportunity to
elect representatives
someone,
of their choice, and the elect representatives of their choice don't have to be members of their own
yes.
group.
Oh, yes, that's
But
correct.
what they're looking for is to get elected boards that are presumably more sympathetic to the point of view of whoever elected them.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that having districts is a means of achieving that goal. What matters is achieving that goal of having the protected group have a voice in choosing the representative.
Yes.
Is that a correct interpretation?
Yes.
Okay, so let's see, where are we on the agenda? Are we done reviewing three, done with three? Oh, no, four. Okay, great. So before we move on to five, I would like to have the staff describe the other aspects of this committee that I didn't get to go into
Sure. Thank you,
of
Chair.
this meeting. Thank you.
So just to reemphasize, we do have two distinct processes going on. Our Deputy City Attorney already mentioned we have the ballot measure for a charter amendment, and then the work of this committee is actually the districting, right? The mapping of the district boundaries. So I just wanted to go through and talk a little bit about the ad hoc committee's purpose. So they're obviously going to be holding the 4 public hearings for council districting, listening and considering all the input received from the public, reviewing the recommendations from the demographer, and then based on all of these factors, they're going to be making a recommendation to the council. So just to be clear, the ad hoc committee is working on the districting mapping.
That's the only aspect of this ordinance that we're going to be addressing, because it has already been decided that if we were to go to district, it's going to be 2 districts.
Correct.
And and
The
the
voting
parameters
method.
that you described at the beginning, that was presented at the beginning of this meeting, those all have been decided. So again, district boundary is the only issue that we will be examining in this committee.
Correct.
Thank you. Oh, committee member Ricosa.
Yes, I would just ask the city staff if they could, well, if we have a slide, or at least indicate the email address that can be used to provide input.
So we'll take input at manager@santaclaraca.gov.
Do they use any specific subject line so that you can be able to?
They can
track
say
this?
district,
Okay.
council district.
Thank you. All right, moving on to public hearing. We're going to open the meeting to public. And if I so far have two people who would like to present, but each person has 3 minutes. Go up there and speak. Okay, so right, so first speaker is Dave Kedelchak.
My name is Dave Kadlachek. There are 3 things I wanted to talk about that are real criteria you should look at and not suggesting any particular boundaries. The first is the 2 districts you're looking at are 3-member districts that will be elected eventually if they're used using single transferable vote, a proportional method, where what's relevant for whether a protected class or other group that you're looking to see whether they can elect representatives of their choice or not, what's relevant is not whether they're the largest group in the district or a majority within the district, but whether they constitute more than 25% of the district to get 1 representative or more than 50% to get 2 representatives. So the way in which you should be looking at things are a little bit different than you would in analyzing single-member districts. And I should mention that the CVRA, the California Voting Rights Act, while people who wrote it may have been intending single-member districts, it only talks about districts, and we think that the dividing the city into 3-member districts is a district method, not an at-large method, and so meets the criteria for being exempt from lawsuits under CVRA. And I hope that the city will be vigorously arguing that in court and winning. So that was the first point. The second is, though you have to use the 2010 census data to determine that districts are equal enough in population, the 2020 census is coming up soon, and there will have to be a redistricting before the 2022 elections, so that it would be very, very important to try and use estimates to make it so that there will have to be as little change in boundaries as possible between these districts and the ones that will be used beginning in 2022. Among other things, those who are assigned to District 1 under this plan won't really be able to vote using the proportional features of the single transferable vote until 2022 because of the transition measures of switching from 2 and 4 council members and the county not having the equipment to do single transferable vote in the 2018 election. So if people are put in District 1 and then move to District 2, they basically won't have a chance to vote proportionally until 2024. 6 years after we started using districts. That's something to avoid. The last thing that I wanted to suggest is that in looking at criteria to see who's represented or not, you might want to look at housing tenancy and type, which can affect how people look at municipal issues. Areas where there's relatively more renters versus homeowners, and where it's single-family homes versus duplexes, triplexes, so forth, versus areas that are large apartment buildings or condo complexes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, a couple questions. Is anyone taking the time? Oh, great, thank you. And thank you very much. I think Mr. Kettle's-Check brought up really good issues. I also serve on the Planning Commission, so I understand what the speaker just now spoke about the housing situation. Is that something that we can also look at?
Yes. I have from Census 2010 housing unit counts, occupied, vacant, but more relevant is the city GIS people are going to get me parcel level data as well as planning area and zoning data that will help me understand what kinds of housing we have where.
Okay, so when you upload that data, post that data online, is that something, a criteria you can, a parameter you can include?
Yes, I can take that into account or report on it. Yes, I was thinking I would do that anyway.
Great. Any? So the next speaker is Javier Batia.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Javier Batia. I'm not here as a cultural commissioner. I'm here as an individual resident. This was very informative. Thank you, Doctor, for sharing some of those insights. A couple comments regarding the population that you're keeping in consideration. You are talking about, of course, 2010 the census, but there's a significant change within the 8 years, and it's happening at such an exponential rate that, I mean, I can't even say it's a linear, it's an exponential. So I think it will have significant impact into your planning of districts, which I think, as the other former person had said as well, you know, we do want to reduce as much as possible the expected or the future, the districting. And I believe in 2015-16, looking at the number of registered voters, it was between 46 and 48. And right now, I think we presented 43. And so, yes, total of 43, I believe that was what was written. And so I think that just, you know, is a highlight of the significant change that may be taking place here. So though we have to go by the census, I think we do need to keep that in mind. You may actually need to look at the 2016 registered voters, which I think the registered voters website says about 50K, but I'm not quite sure if that's accurate. So that's a significant discrepancy. Now, the second part you had asked was, you know, about where do we think the lines or the boundaries should be? Is it, you know, geographically? The northern part of Santa Clara has very drastically different challenges. Not that they are unique, but they are different in the most part. And we have such a significant number of planned developments. So I think keeping that in mind will also be critical, because you will have a sense of the number of units being planned for. Keeping those in mind as forecasts, I think, is a good idea to consider that now, so we can reduce the amount of change that may happen later. Just as the previous gentleman said, with the 2020 and 2022, you will see significant changes because of the way that districting was done. I think just as a general question, when you get a moment to answer that, do you have access to how many of the local residents are in queue or in future plans for green cards? Because I think that information is provided by USCIS, because that will tell you, again, projections. Right now, I think Northside had 3,000 residents that were registered, which is very small. But because it takes 1 to 5 years to get a green card, and then another 5 years for your citizenship, you can already, again, tell in 8 years, a lot has changed. So many people that were not able to vote will be able to vote. So those are just the things that I think would be good to know if we can get that information. And if you can, as Yuki said, please share that with us. Thank you.
Thank you. So, I guess Ms. Batia asked about the projections, and just one thing I remember, last time I saw the city population was only 130,000 people, and then today I heard that it's more like 160. So in just a few years, the population grew by more than 20%. So that's a huge growth, and I'm sure it has a significant impact on the demography compared to what your data says from 2010. So it will be as the speaker just mentioned. It'll be useful to have some estimate of where changes have taken place. Okay, any comments from any other community member? Right. The next speaker is Hossam Haga.
You can probably hear me from over here, right? I'm going to stay as far away as I can from it. Thank you again to our committee and to our wonderful guests and our city staff. I'm really excited about this. Obviously, I was on the previous charter review committee that recommended this. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask, as Diana said at the beginning of the meeting. There are a few things with all the smart members of the charter review committee who proposed 2-member districts makes our life a whole lot easier when it comes to drawing the lines. I think Dr. Gobele mentioned that as already in the beginning. And really, when you look at Santa Clara, for all of us who live here in Santa Clara, know that there are very well-identified neighborhoods. Our committee members obviously know this very well. So in the interest of kind of educating our guests here, the way I see drawing the line or drawing the districts, the easiest way, and I think a lot of our residents would agree, is to just start from the north and the south, and then move your way inward until you reach the near 50-50 split in terms of population. And then where you come in that line to achieve that 50-50%, that's where the ethnic neighborhoods are going to matter. A lot of the issues, as Dr. Willie mentioned, on the north side with respect to the stadium, with respect to Great America, and the issues surrounding that. A lot of the residents in the north side, as Javier mentioned, and as as a member of the north side, are, and we saw in the maps, of the non-white Asian population. And then when you look at the north side, which is the hotbed of new development, a lot of those are going to be your townhomes, your condos, and you're not going to really find any single-family homes. So it's going to take into consideration all of those different aspects. As you come near towards the middle, really one of the things that you should consider when drawing the line is looking at the major arteries that we have. So you have Central Expressway and you have El Camino Real, where really neighborhoods don't typically cross those big arteries. So when looking at how you draw the line and where you follow along in that line, those arteries, because they're large expressways, are already creating or serving as a natural boundary for these neighborhoods. So when you look at the data right now, if you look at the Central Expressway, it does not create for you a 50-50 split. El Camino Real creates a fairly close 50-50 split, and it doesn't cause any neighborhoods to be split up in the process. It also preserves a lot of the ethnic minorities up on the north side as well, so that they do have that opportunity to elect representatives. As Dave rightly mentioned, the percentage really that we should be looking for is, will that protected class be able to have 25% voting power in their district to get at least one representative? And that line would align, following nearly on El Camino will achieve that. When you do look at the, real quick, and I'm going to just close up, when you look at the line that El Camino crosses, it does potentially split Koreatown on the west side. So if there is some play that needs to be done with balancing out the 50-50, then that might be an area of interest where you move the line to include Koreatown in either district. And then also don't follow El Camino down to split the university area. You might want to, on the east side, take El Camino and then split it off towards Coleman. So those are just some of my suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This brings me to my next question, and I'm making all these comments because I think this is the time to make comments and provide as much input as possible, because the further down we go, the more difficult it is to make changes. Dr. Gobele, how many district boundaries are you going to propose? Are you going to come up with one proposal and you're going to ask us to modify several different proposals and how that will impact the demographic breakdown.
Whatever seems to be appropriate when that time comes. I think it's a little too soon for me to answer that question. I have the idea that although there are an infinite number of possible lines that could be drawn, there will be some things that people agree about, or most people agree about, that could be adopted into any plan that I show you. But there are other nuances that might be treated, areas could be treated one way or the other, and it wouldn't really make a numerical difference, but it might make a big difference in terms of what people think of as communities of interest or something else. So I don't have a set number that I would show you. I think that what I might, in general, but not necessarily in this case, do is give two alternatives for people to react to, not thinking that either one of them would be ideal, but two ideas of how it could be done that people could either say, hey, that makes sense, or no, don't do it that way, do this instead. And that's very useful. So I'm not going to show you the final plan at the third public hearing.
Okay,
sure.
All right. And in any case, I think a lot of people have a lot of ideas of where we should draw the boundaries, but I think the intent of this committee is that this exercise be a data-driven process, so that whatever decision we arrive at, we'll have the numbers to back up our decision. Okay, the next speaker is Rob Jerdonek.
Hi, my name is Rob Jerdonek. I'm a resident here in the North Side. I lived in Santa Clara for 12 years. I just want to say I'm really supportive of this ballot measure. I'm especially supportive of ranked choice voting. I think this will result in a much more fair and equitable system for electing our city council and other elected officials. I know that ranked choice voting has worked really well in other cities all across America. I like the idea of drawing the district lines so we can ensure that protected groups have a fair chance of getting elected. So I encourage you to draw a line that really enables this to happen. And I think this will lead not just to a diversity of races and ethnicities in our city council, but also to diversity of ideas. New perspectives will lead overall to better decision making in the government. So we live in a very diverse city here in Santa Clara, and I'm looking forward to the possibility of seeing the diversity of Santa Clara reflected in our city council and other elected officials. Thank you very much for driving forward this initiative.
Thank you very much. Okay. The next speaker is Margaret Okuzumi.
So I'm Margaret Okuzumi, and I'm with Fair Vote, California. And what this map is that I handed out to you, it's just a first pass look at the numbers. If you draw a line that mostly follows El Camino Real, the numbers are of total population, and the percentages are of total population. Now, for purposes of complying with the Voting Rights Act, you'll need to ensure, we don't have that analysis, but as others have mentioned, that the Asian American CVAP is at least 25% for each district. So you'll want to be mindful of that, to look for that when you draw the line. Now, the districts are labeled pink and yellow. Actually, on my printer, I need to adjust it. It kind of came out more green. But you can see that the population for the district drawn for the north side is less than on the, or is it more? let's see, I forget, I don't have it right in front of me. Then the other side, and as you know, population growth on the north side has been fairly heavy. And so you'll want to keep that in mind in drawing the map. Now, as far as tweaking this map, I believe you'll want to get input from people in Koreatown and maybe adjust the line to keep Koreatown together, but then you might need to like dip the line down so that you can comply with the 10% population deviation to keep that in balance. Of course, with the redistricting or the districting, depending on which district goes first. So, like, for example, if the north side were to go first and for population balance reasons, you needed to put more population there, it's possible that you would consider that in a later election that, you know, some of that population would likely get shifted over to the next district for that election. But again, you'd have to take a look at those numbers. But that is a political consideration. So I hope that that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And I think, okay. Committee member Ricosta.
Yes, thank you. The speaker brought up a good point. The other action we have to take as part of this committee is to decide which district is District 1 and District 2, because that affects the election and the transition of 2018 and 2020.
Correct.
So as a point of order.
And we'll be taking input along the way, but it's probably appropriate during public hearings 3 and 4 to get that input after the line is drawn.
Thank you. Okay, no. All right. Okay. So the next speaker is Hazel Arbado.
Hi there. My name is Hazel Albato. I've been a resident of Northside for over 30 years. And I just kind of want to reiterate what some of people in the public have already said, that the Northside is really positioned for expansive growth and to really consider that when drawing the lines, because there's an imbalance today regarding population, but I could see in a couple of years and a couple of decades where that will change significantly. There's, Santa Clara Square, City Place, Freedom Circle, the Kylie, Patrick Henry, Tasman East. That's over already 10,000, 15,000 units. I don't know the exact numbers, but if you guys can get that in total and what's expected. And then there's also on the north side really large corporations that exist. And there's Levi Stadium, there's Good America, there's Mission College. There's also really large religious communities, Our Lady of Peace. I think the MCA is also in the north side, or in 95054, and North Valley Baptist Church. So really large communities in this area. I think that also, I really liked what Hossam said about looking at north and south and then kind of squeezing it. And then just kind of unofficially, there's also a good number of Filipinos, which are the third Asian largest population in the 2010 census, that exist in the Fairwayland neighborhood, Hogan neighborhood, and the Montague single-family home areas, Lakeshore Drive as well. So those are some things to consider when drawing lines. Thank you.
Thank you. Are we going to be able to identify Filipino members of the community based on the techniques that you use?
Yes, we do have those counts from Census 2010. So I'm thinking it's pretty obvious that I need to do some maps showing the distribution of Asian subgroups, as well as a number of other things.
Are you going to do any extrapolations? It's something that several speakers have raised as concern, because our population and the demography is changing very quickly.
Yes, I understand that. That is an important point, and I will need to consult with city staff about that to see what data are available and what time frame we have to be able to do that.
Okay.
That is something we often do look at, but first of all, I wanted to
to point out that not necessarily all of the housing will be occupied by Census 2020. That's in the works. So if we were to start looking into what's happened since 2010 in the way of housing development and occupancy, we could get those data. But as far as forecasting how many people there will be from the new developments as of Census 2020, that gets a bit dicier.
I understand, and we're in 2018, and we're going to have new data in 2020. But so my understanding is that that 10% differential is based on the 2010 census data.
Yes.
But other demographic information, there's no constraints on what data we need to look at.
Well,
the latest is
we still have to stay
better.
within the 10% deviation using Census 2010. But if we were to take population growth since 2010 on the north side and citywide and all the parts of the city into account, we could make the council district that's most likely has a larger population, substantially larger population than in 2010, a bit smaller. So that the deviation might not be too much greater after 2020. In other words, we can make the city council district that's probably had more population growth smaller, but we still have to stick it within that 10% maximum deviation.
So what I'm hearing, what I think I'm maybe hearing is that we may not be going with the 2010 number. We may be going with the estimate. We are still going with the 2010
No, we have to
number.
use 2010, but and the deviation of 10% is based on 2010 counts. But we could try to estimate what the population growth approximately has been in different parts of the city, and if the north side indeed has had more population growth than the rest of the city, we could make that a smaller district in terms of 2010 population. So since between 20...
Oh, okay, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I have to give you a caveat. We've tried to do this in the past between census 1980 and 1990, between census 1990 and 2000, and between census 2000 and 2010 in doing redistricting work, and we hardly ever have managed to be able to do that because the differential population growth tends to be too great to allow the plan to still be within the maximum deviation. But we could certainly look at that, but I doubt very much that we could fix it so no adjustments are necessary after 2020. But we could look at that and try to reduce the amount of adjustment that might be needed. But when we do redistricting, and we've been doing redistricting work since 1980 census, which is a long time now, it isn't too hard to redraw boundaries because there are logical chunks of territory often that are on the lines between two districts that can be shifted intact, and people don't seem to mind it too much. So I don't think we should get too focused on taking post-2010 population growth into account, because as in my experience, it rarely has worked out that we could manage to still be within 10% deviation after a new census count is released.
Several people raised the issue of 25%, having a block of people being able to have that 25% in order to be able to elect someone of their choosing. It seems to me that in order to look at that issue, we need to look at the number of registered voters.
Yes, well, I was going to do that. The map I showed you earlier is 2010 registered voters, and so I'm going to update that, but the latest data available are for 2016. I've already checked and downloaded the data, actually, from the statewide database. So, yes, I can look at a more recent set of registered voter data, but not this year's registered voter data.
Thank you for answering my questions. Okay, do we have anyone else who wants to? Okay, Committee Member Ricosa.
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for coming out and speaking your thoughts, and we appreciate it. We're very much in listening mode, so we have 3 more meetings. You're certainly welcome to return, and also send emails in to the address where we take the input. So again, we're in listening mode. I know I understand the issue, the somewhat frustration of that we have to go with the 2010 census, but that's the law and we need to live within the law for that. But we certainly understand your concerns. But again, thank you very much for coming out tonight.
Thank you. Okay, Committee Member Estrada.
I also want to thank the city and for all your help this evening and your presentation, and the audience for giving us the data and helping us to make this decision. So thank you very much.
Oh, I forgot to close the public hearing. Any motion to close the public hearing? Second? Okay, all in favor? Aye. All right. I guess unless anyone else has any comments, or we're going to any motion to adjourn. Okay, all in favor? Aye. And thank you again for coming to speak, and we look forward to seeing you again at the next meeting.
And
thank you very much.
Sorry, just so I can note, we're adjourning to the March 8th ad hoc committee meeting at 6 p.m. at City Hall Council Chambers.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.